All right. Good evening to everybody. Glad you're here for another evening conversation. This is another crucial conversation on this Sunday night. This will be the crucial conversation for November. We'll be doing another one in December, but I'm grateful for this opportunity to gather back together with you again. It's been a few weeks since we were last together in October. I'm going to introduce our guest, the Reverend Sharon Risher, in just a second. Before we get into that introduction, I want to remind you that you can use the chat feature to post any questions or comments that you have. You can also email Whitney Bogle directly if you'd like to remain anonymous and post a question to Reverend Risher or myself. Crucial conversations are an opportunity for us to model healthy dialogue around issue of racial injustice and racism. We will be okay, and you'll see at the end of our time together that this conversation may have been difficult and at times uncomfortable, but we will all be still here. It will not be so painful that we'll never want to do it again. So that is our charge for this evening. And I'm going to stop instructing and go ahead and move into our conversation time. The Reverend Sharon Risher is a native of Charleston, South Carolina. She is also a Texan. She graduated from Austin Seminary in 2007, where she received the Master of Divinity. She also served as a chaplain here at Parkland Hospital prior to her most recent move to Charlotte, North Carolina. So she went in the opposite direction from me. So while I was coming this way, she was leaving Texas. Reverend Risher, welcome to Crucial Conversations and welcome to the First Presbyterian Church of Dallas. We're grateful for your company.
I am so humbled to be on this webinar with you tonight. I feel like Texas is a second home. Well, I started out in Charleston. Then I went to Charlotte, North Carolina for college. Stayed, married, divorced, and then I went to Texas. So coming back to Charlotte is like kind of coming back home because I spent most of my adult life in Charlotte, North Carolina. But Texas will always be home for me because Texas is a place that God allowed me to really find out who I am and what God had called me to do. So Texas is that transformation place for me, the good and the bad, mostly more good than bad. But yes, very proud of saying that I lived in Texas, Austin and Dallas, one of the two nice cities. So
yeah. While you were here in Texas, June 17th, right, 2015, you got a phone call from back home. That was the day that your mother was killed along with 8 others at the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston. What did you do the day after?
the day, well, okay, so the day it happened on a Wednesday night. So it wasn't until maybe Thursday evening that I actually fell asleep. I was working at Parkland that night, and I usually get off at 11 o'clock, but in the mix of all of that, I'm getting phone calls that something had happened. At that point, they didn't know. And the dread in the knowing something is happening and I'm not there really kind of overtook me, and I left work early. Started making phone calls. I'm a smoker, and I'm gonna just say it. I chained, smoked cigarettes, and drank coffee, trying to wait up. And I must have fell asleep on the couch, and the phone rings. And my niece said, "It's the FBI chaplain." And when she said that, I knew. But I kind of knew, but to have it confirmed. So from that point on, I walked around my apartment really in a fog. Like I was walking in circles, just trying to understand, trying to figure out, okay, chaplains don't make a whole lot of money. So now my brains is turning about I have to get a plane ticket. I got to do this. I got to do that. All these things start to turn in my mind. And I just walked around in a few state, just not being able to comprehend all that I had heard. Yeah.
In one of your writings, I read that it was your minister's instinct that told you something wasn't right even before you knew the details.
Yes. Being a chaplain, you kind of, you get with the doctors and all of that before you go in with the family. And so all along, you're working with the family, making sure everything's okay. And then the doctor, you know, everybody's getting their thing together, the interdisciplinary group, the chaplain, the doctor, and you walk in there and they could look on your face and know that something is wrong. And so that night, I knew that because I hadn't heard anything. And as a chaplain, we would have these families and they're waiting and waiting to hear what the doctor is saying. And then I clicked in my head, Sharon, you already know what this means. Yeah. I tell you, that whole experience really is a fog. I don't even know how I got through writing that book because I've lost so much in my memory about it and I'm older, but it was like this was happening somewhere else. That this was not happening in Charleston. And how did my little old mama, who always stayed in the background doing her thing, how did she become a part of this?
How long had your mother attended Emmanuel?
My mother joined Emmanuel in 1974 because I remember I was a sophomore in high school when we joined Emmanuel. So it was, like I said in the book, when Mama got Jesus. When Mama got Jesus and we all started to go to Emmanuel, that's when our identity with Emmanuel started. She was invited by actually Miss Susie Jackson's family. Cousin Susie was a cousin, and then Tywanza Sanders a cousin. And so their families invited my mother because they were distant cousins, invited her and my grandmother to visit Emmanuel. They fell in love with the church, and the rest is history. They loved that church. Emmanuel, well, in the community, Emmanuel's kind of the big shot church, like First Dallas, the big shot church, the church that everybody knows about, the church where the judges and the lawyers and, you have your regular people, but it's that blend of people that drew Emmanuel. So you felt proud to be a part of church, and the, nobody really ever really talked about the history, but you knew it was there. You knew that you were a part of something bigger than yourself in being a member of Emmanuel. So my mom's took her membership very seriously. She was on usher board number 3, and in the AME church they have all the ushers dressed in uniform and they would march down the aisle, and they had the ushers strut. They had this particular walk that they had, and my mom's was the leader of that usher board number 3 and the usher strut. So she took pride in being a part of that church, and and did everything she could as a lay person in the church, you know. Yeah.
Tell us where Emmanuel is situated in Charleston, um, and how and its relationship with the city of Charleston. It says it's historic. Emmanuel's historic. Charleston is a historic city as well. Um, where is it in the city?
Well, Emmanuel is on Calhoun Street, one of the main arteries in the city. Emmanuel is across the street from the elementary school I attended. Emmanuel is diagonal from the place, the city of Charleston, now called the Gilliard Center. But back in the day, it was the Gilliard Auditorium, where my mom was one of the first people hired for that place. So Emmanuel was in the heart of the city, overlooking John C. Calhoun. You know, you could see the church's steeple and then John C. Calhoun's statue in the park.
Mm.
You know, Emmanuel is close to the money district, King Street in Charleston. So Emmanuel sits in the hood adjacent. Can you say that, hood adjacent?
You
That's
can't say that.
Emmanuel.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Whereas far enough away from the business, but close enough to the hood.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm. The you're talking about June 17th, and you were thinking about practical matters, like how do I get home and get a plane ticket? How did my mother get caught up in all this? And um, at what point did you begin to make the connection between uh, the and understand the racial undertones of this heinous act?
When things really started to click with me is when I heard my sister on national TV said, "I forgive you."
Mm.
Now, this happened Wednesday night. Friday morning, they're in the bond hearing for Dylan Roof, and I hadn't even gotten to Charleston yet. And I'm in my bedroom doing something, poking around, doing something because I've got the TV on because I was drawn to the TV because it was everywhere. And I kept thinking, well, maybe it didn't really happen. Maybe they hadn't said everything yet. And I heard my sister say, "If God could forgive you, I can forgive you." And I ran into the living room and just started screaming because I couldn't understand. It's like, wait a minute, hold up. They're talking about forgiving this white supremacist that went into the church and just killed mama, and you're standing up there talking about it. I just couldn't understand that
It's,
because now
yeah.
I'm angry. I'm
Mhm.
angry. I'm in a fog state. I'm just overwhelmed. And to hear my sister talk about forgiveness, I was like, I'm just through.
It was, and that was like you said, 2 days after, right? So that was Friday, and the killing happened on that Wednesday night, and it was the way it was portrayed that Friday hearing. He appeared in Dylan Roof appeared in closed circuit television from I think the county jail,
Right.
um, and it the way it was portrayed in the media was that all of the victims' families, uniformly and consistently extended forgiveness 2 days after, um, 2 days after the killing. And a few people are quoted in the news articles that were circulating at the time. Um, and it was, I will say, it was powerful, you
Mm-hmm.
know, it was a powerful
Mm-hmm.
expression that went a long way towards healing, I think. Um, but what I'm hearing you say is that it's not as consistent as it wasn't as consistent at that time as it was portrayed.
No. And let me say this. Sneaky Jesus.
Mm,
Because I've talked to the family members that talked about forgiveness and didn't talk about forgiveness, and all of them said when my sister got up to the podium, everybody was looking at each other because they were like, oh my God, what's getting ready to come out of her mouth? Because my sister is very feisty. Like our lawyer said, Ethel had a bunch of feisty daughters. Yes. So they didn't know what was going to come out of her mouth. And when she started to talk about forgiveness, everybody else said that forgiveness wasn't even on their conscience, that they had came in there telling themselves that they were not really going to talk or say anything because they didn't know what would come out their mouths.
mm,
It's not until I had a chance to sit back and really think about this. I believe God prompted them through his Holy Spirit
mm.
to talk about forgiveness, to bring that powerful witness that had to happen. Because if they hadn't, Charleston was on the edge of being another Baltimore Ferguson, and that's the bottom line. But God used them to say, this is how we're going to set the tone for this. We're going to show Dylan Roof that race war he thought he was getting ready to begin was not going to happen on his watch with those people. But I had to get there. This is sometime later when I'm really starting to understand and trying to understand, and in the process of my own forgiving. I had to analyze all of that because I was like, here we are again, Black people. Here we are forgiving again. That's what we do. But then there's a difference in forgiveness and acceptance. You see, acceptance means what I'm going to take what you're giving me. I'm going to deal with that. I'm going to accept that. But forgiveness, I don't really just have to accept it. I could go through the depths of my soul, be free of you. So then acceptance is no longer needed. So we know, Black people, we've done a lot of accepting, accepted, and we keep on accepting.
We've carried the burden of healing. Um,
Yeah.
you're so right about South Carolina being just on the edge, not just Charleston. I mean, the entire state.
North Carolina
North
too.
Carolina too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's really easy to forget, what those days were like. Um, that is, I mean, in one place I was, in my preparation for tonight, I was reading back over some stuff and I noticed that, one of his friends said that, he didn't even think that, Dylan Roof was targeting the church, but that he intended to go into a school and just had too much trouble getting into the school. The security was too tight. And so he just picked the church and didn't know, about, Emmanuel AME. I mean, it is historically, the most prominent African American congregation in South Carolina. And, not just in Charleston, that it's situated in Charleston, of course, which is Charleston is uh, sits at the intersection of so much of, uh, Southern history, slave history, um, right down the road from Emmanuel, you've got the market, right?
Mm-hmm.
People come from all over the world to go to the market in Charleston, not knowing exactly what happened there.
But
Who
I will say this, Dylan Roof, he scouted out that
we scouted, yeah.
church.
Yes.
He scouted out the church.
Right.
He got information offline.
Mhm.
He knew the exits and the entrance of the church. So, I mean, to his friend, maybe, after he saw that the school wasn't going to do it, then he started to, however, he got a hold of Emmanuel, that he did his homework
Right.
because he had traveled around the Charleston area to different sites that was very prominent for Black people out of that slavery
Right.
part of our history.
But that is our tendency, right? Is to try to as quickly as possible, just like write out the racial part of tragedy, right? And to come up with some other reason why somebody would do this, right? They just accent a white supremacist and neo-Nazi just happened to stumble upon the most prominent African American congregation,
Right.
right, in the entire state in Charleston, right, which was uh, a market for slaves. I mean, I don't know how many weddings I've done at plantations within 10 minutes of Charleston, right? What are now called,
Mhm.
what they call, people still get married at these plantations. They're everywhere. I mean, Charleston's all ate up with that history.
Yes, very much.
I mean,
I didn't really know all about Charleston history like that. I mean, until I was a senior in high school and I actually took a bus tour, and to hear the tour guide talk about Charleston like Black people was just added dressing
right.
to
Yeah.
the rest of it,
Yeah.
you know. And it just astounded me that this is how they really look at us.
Right.
This is how, when the people come here from all over, this is what they think of Charleston.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they call it racial tourism now. Where you come to Charleston and it's sort of a pilgrimage of sorts, and you can even the former plantations, which are now event venues, they often have like tour guides that are historians, and will walk you. They've restored slave quarters and
Hmm.
they've set the plantation back up, in a very like historically accurate way. And people come and they get married at these plantations, and then also take a racial tourism trip, make a racial tourism trip out of it. Charleston is working hard to tell that story,
Yes.
but it's a long story to tell, and I'm not sure everyone is ready to hear the darkest parts of it. Um,
Well, I'm a product of the darkest parts. My mother was raped as a young teenager
hmm,
by white men. There is that part of me that's biracial that I've yet to really reconcile with because I was brought up Black. My soul is Black, but my DNA says that it's Black in something else. It's Black because, and white because the power that was exerted against mother, she couldn't do nothing about, that comes from the slave masters raping Black women and having biracial children. So in America, we just can't act like these things didn't happen. And maybe your parents or your grandfather or great grandfather might not have been a part of that, but they were part of something. So that makes you as a a descendant of that culpable to some things. this racial tension, this racial injustice that we continue to see in America has been fueled. I'm going to just go there. It's been fueled by the highest office in the land. 70 million people voted for a person that we as Christians say that is something that we aren't going to take a part of because we have a different understanding of who we are as people when we call ourselves followers of God and Jesus Christ. So we can't just let our moral compass fall by the wayside because of a life that we tell ourselves we deserve to have. Charleston, that whole tragedy that tore me and those other 9 families that tore up the world. It continually lets us know that there is no wanting to stop racism because now white supremacy and the alt-right and all of that are raging more than they have ever have. And it's 2020 and they are rising up and they're letting us know that. So what are we going to do about that? We, the people, children of God, are we going to sit by and listen to our preacher Sunday after Sunday give us the kumbaya gospel? Are you really going to be the gospel that Christ asked of us? Because if we are, then white supremacy and all of that, they would see that people aren't going to sit there and let them just take over like that. But that's not what's happening. How do you reconcile, people of God, to say that you follow Jesus Christ, but your behavior and your action says otherwise? And I know not all white people are racist. Some of the most help I have had in my life to go on to do bigger things have been because of the relationship that I have forged with other white people that meant to help me. So I know that not all white people are racist, but the majority seemingly now, their action says otherwise. But me, I'm just not going to lose hope in humanity. I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to let white supremacy and nationalists and patriots and whatever make me so angry that I would start to think like that. Mhm.
When is it useful to be angry?
It's useful to be angry if your anger is going to propel you into action. That's when your anger is useful because you can't keep that stuff in. It has to come out. Because if it don't, it will eat you up. And that's what walking the road of forgiveness for me was about with Dylan Roof. After getting over the anger and really starting to deal with myself and the conversations with God or no conversations with God, I had to reconcile that I can't live my life carrying this heavy burden. It was like I had a tire and a piece of rope and I'm dragging this tire And the more I drag this tire, the more I'm not getting anywhere because it's weighing me down. And that's what that anger and rage and all of that against Dylan Roof and not wanting to forgive him was doing to me. And I came to that realization, and God said, you could forgive him. I forgave you. He, Dylan Roof, is offered the same salvation you are, Sharon. And I started to really understand that. And the more I started to understand that, I'm going to tell you, I started to feel sorry for Dylan Roof. That's the God that had to be in me, that I actually started to feel sorry for this little young boy that was led astray, that the grown-ups in his life failed him somehow, that he had to attach himself to a group of people that did not make him feel like a loser. So I was able to get that off of me. It took almost 2 years, but that's because I was honest about that. And I had to go through that in order to get there. You know, the hardest things in our life is the times that we have gone through pain and self-reflection. You have to really dig into yourself to have transformation and to be able to let something, to let it go where it doesn't have any power over you anymore. I was relinquishing Dylan Roof's power over me because he had that power and I wanted my own power back, the power that the Holy Spirit affords me. Yeah.
Have you always been comfortable saying his name?
No. And a lot of people in the circles that I roam around in don't like you to call the perpetrator's name. But see, I call Dylan Roof's name now because he doesn't have any power over me. He's just Dylan. He doesn't cause me instant pain anymore because I've let go of the power he's had over my life.
Mhm.
He's just a non-entity to me. Yeah, yeah. So I hate to see his pictures though. I hate, now I live a life where something happened and has to do with race and hate and shootings. Charleston is always going to come up. Dylan Roof face is always splashed over. I can't stand to see his picture. So if he pops up, I flip real quick because I don't like to see his face. But yeah, saying his name doesn't bother me. Yeah, not anymore.
He's still unrepentant, and to this day,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Even as he sits on death row, federal death row at this point.
And how about that? That I got to the point that I didn't even want him to be on death row because then out of Charleston, I got an understanding of the death penalty.
Mm.
Here we go again with some self understanding and knowing, because out of Charleston, you had racism, you had the issues of the death penalty, you had forgiveness, all of these different things were coming out of what had happened. And when the state of South Carolina knew right quick that they were going to ask for the death penalty for him, I always felt like I was for the death penalty. And then Dylan Roof. And then that sneaky Jesus gets to me and gets me to start to digging and research and read, to put it all out there. And then I can make a decision about what I believe. And then I realized, but wait a minute, the death penalty has been used against Black and brown people more than any other people. So now if I don't want the death penalty for them, I can pick and choose it. I don't believe that the state has a right to kill somebody, even though, back then, anything somebody did horrific, you feel like they need to die. But them dying not gonna bring his dying ain't gonna bring my mom back. I want him to have Bible study until the day he die. Them angels gonna come every night. He know at 7 o'clock they coming, because that was the time Bible study started with them, and they coming and they gonna talk about the parable of the sower, because that's the Bible study that they were talking about. And they gonna sit in, they gonna come visit him every night. Every night they gonna have Bible study with Dylan Roof in his cell. Mhm. Maybe he might not be repenting now, but he's young. Hmm.
There's that detail that's often shared about or told about the about that night, and I always wonder why is this lifted up? Why do people say this? But what they say is that he was in there for 40 minutes and he almost decided to not do it because
Hmm.
the hosts of the Bible study were so nice to him.
Hmm.
And always, whenever I hear that, I'm like, well, almost doesn't count, in mass killings. It just doesn't count. Almost doesn't
Hmm.
count.
Hmm. Yeah. Almost mean you knew better.
Yeah.
You know right from wrong. But you decided that this was what you was going to do. And we hate to say that, there are that evil is out there and that some people are just evil. Some people are. And that's just a fact. And I think he was just one of those evil ones, that his mind was so sick in sin, so sick and removed from God, that he was able to do that.
Mm.
And I've had so many Lutherans come up to me to try to apologize for Dylan Roof, because his family is Lutheran. And I'm looking at them like, I accept your apology, but you don't need to apologize to me, because that was not you that was in that church. That was him. I'm not going to look at the whole Lutheran denomination because of him, but it made them feel better. So I graciously accepted it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said a word about the sermons that the kumbaya sermons that you too often hear. What what is the sermon that you do want to hear from preachers and from churches today?
The sermon I want to hear from preachers is a sermon about who we are as God's children. If we are God's children, then our actions have to say that. We can't worry about the stock market and if we live in a certain neighborhood, if our children get to go to particular schools, because I want to continually be separated from people. If we are true followers of God, then we're going to be there for each other. Not saying you can't live where you live, but don't stay where you live. Don't come into the world and do your job and then run back to your bubble to be something else. And when you come in church, you're the deacons and the elders and everything, and you give donations and you give to the poor, but you would never have somebody black come into your house and eat dinner. I want the sermons to be the true gospel of God, that we all are here for one another. And when we all are affected, when one is affected, we all are affected. I want to hear about what it really means to love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the kind, of sermons I want to hear. I want to hear sermons about what's really the true story that's going on outside the church doors. Yeah.
What's happening at Mother Emmanuel now? How what is the church doing? How is it healing? What how did June 17th, 2015 change the church's identity and its sense of purpose and mission?
Okay, so this is just me. Emmanuel will never be the same.
Mhm.
The blood of those 9 people are in that fellowship hall
Mhm.
where they continually to have activities and worship. There is not that community church. Now it's more of a transient church. You have a handful of people that are been long time members forever and ever. But now on a given Sunday, you don't know who you will have in your congregation. So the church is just trying to survive,
Mm.
even after all the money that poured into that church. They're still just trying to survive. The church has really kind of built a reputation of come to the church where the 9 people died.
Mm.
I mean, not like if you're not personally connected to the church, you'd never see that. You'd never really see that the identity of that church now is related to the Emmanuel 9.
Mm.
Yeah. And so
Racism.
there, people want to come to the church and take pictures in front of the church. I believe that church, for me, that church needs to be a museum and the congregation find a new place, build a new Emmanuel
Mm.
that will go forth.
Mm.
Because right now, that building, that edifice, just won't ever be the same. That's just me. But they're putting a memorial up at the church, and we're raising money for that. And there's going to be a survivor's garden, and so to me, that's where the museum come in, huh? Mm. But anyway, um, there is going to be a permanent memorial for them, and I thank God that will happen. The same architect that drew up the plan for the 9/11 memorial is the same person that's doing the renderings and everything for the Emmanuel 9 memorial. So they've got top-notch people on getting that. Yeah.
The tragedies, of course, in the death of 9 people, but racism kills everything that it touches. Everything. Destroys it.
Yeah. Hmm.
The lives were taken, but it seeps like blood into all the surfaces.
Yes.
So this young man, 21 years
And
old,
it runs deep.
and it runs deep into our bodies and our bones and gets passed down from one generation to the next, whether
Yes.
we want it to or not. It just is, it's I don't want to linger on it too much, what will happen to that community of faith, that church going forward. But just to imagine, it gives me no comfort to think about the future in that who knows what will come of it, right? There will be resurrection and already has been, in many ways.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But the identity of the church, what you're talking about, just the such grief being present that it would almost be better for them to be located somewhere else at this point. Racism kills everything that it touches. Yeah. He was from the same town that I'm from, Columbia.
I when I saw your when I looked at your video and it said that you were from Columbia, I'm like, wow, okay then.
Yeah.
I wanted to go to USC. We visited, I was in Upward Bound coming up, and we visited the USC campus. And I said, ooh, I would love to go here. But now this is 1976. So it was like, And when I really started to put in applications and everything, it was like, nah, I don't think I'm going to be able to get in there. So I went to the private Presbyterian college in North Carolina. Didn't know the connection that the Presbyterians would have in my life,
Uh,
but I walked around that campus like, wow, ooh, yeah.
you said earlier that you were circumspect about your biracial identity, but you were very firm about the condition or the color of your soul. And you said, my soul is black. What does that mean for you?
My soul is black from the church mothers when I was 10 years old that took me to church with them when my mother wasn't in church, that took me to the little AME church where I sang in the choir. My soul is black from the food that I eat, from the rice almost every day. My soul is black and learning about all of the Black Americans and Black History Month coming up and learning about all of these people. Mary McLeod Bethune's birthday is July 10th. My birthday is July 10th. So I was proud to know that I shared the same birthday with this phenomenal Black woman. My soul is black because my mother has dark skin where her family lived off the land of shrimping and my great grandfather making the shrimp nets. All of these things make my soul black. The Gullah language, when I've had 2 glasses of wine
Yeah.
and go home and it starts to come out, my soul is black from that Gullah Geechee language. Yeah. And even with the light skin, you knew that I was black. But always the question was, how? How did you become black? Because you don't look it. So now there is a story, because there's always a story, for light skinned black people.
Mm.
That's what people think, but it is most of the time.
When
There
did
was
you
some
start?
mixing.
When did you start asking yourself that question about the truth of your story?
When I was maybe about 6 years old, and I say this in the book, I was on John's Island, one of the islands where my stepdad, his mother lived, and we were running around. This is rural, and we're running around, and one of the older ladies on the porch, she asked my step grandma, "Well, who's the little light skinned girl?" And she said, "Well, that's my son's daughter." And she said, "Well, that ain't his daughter, but that's his daughter." And I heard this, and that's when I realized, oh, I do look different.
Wow.
And that daddy isn't my real daddy. But I didn't really question that anymore until after my mother died, to talk about the biracial part, because that was just not something I would have never known the circumstances of my birth and unless my mom's when I was 56 years old for something that had been burned inside me all my life. And when she finally told me, that's when I started to reconcile being biracial. And my daughter would always joke around with me about when I would say I'm black or whatever. She was like, Ma, I wish you would quit saying that because no, you're not just black. You need to embrace the other side of you. And I'm looking at her like she's crazy because I'm like, I'm not embracing something that I'm not a part of, regardless if that's what my DNA says. Mhm. So I'm still kind of working on that, being able to say out loud that I'm biracial because I never have said that, not while my mother was living, because that would have hurt her to the core. That would have hurt her to the core for me to say that I was biracial, because then that would have meant you known the narrative of her life and
Mm.
how that happened. Mhm. Yeah.
So all the truths that we have to swallow, right? And hold.
Yeah. Yeah. There is, it runs deep, Amos. It does. And we somehow have to understand that we know it's not easy, but I think black people, we just want to know that you're going to try, that you're going to honestly, authentically try to see us people and just not black people, not to stereotype all of us, to give us a chance to know that black and brown and others aren't going to make you different who you are. Because you eat dinner with me or invite me to your house, not gonna make you no more white than you already are. I'm not gonna put my blackness and you gonna get some on you. I mean, I'm being facetious, but I'm being real. You know, my blackness not gonna rub off on you. But we have to be willing. We just gotta be willing to listen and to try to have compassion and empathy. Who would want to walk? I think it was Dave Chappelle or somebody, a comedian, that said, asked, he was doing a show and says, show me the hands that would rather be black than white. Not a hand shot up. Who wants to be black or who wants to be brown, you know? Mm, that was telling. That was some truth telling right there. Because nobody wants to be able to walk in the shoes of black and brown and other people. Mm-mm. Yeah.
Who were some people that you leaned on and reflected with in your 2-year journey towards forgiveness?
You know what? I kind of walked in by myself a little bit. I had people around me, you know what I'm saying? Because when I moved from Dallas, I moved in with my daughter who was single. So then I had the support of her and my son. There were some friends that I've had, you know, from all my other years of living in Charlotte, and but people just really didn't know what to do with me. And because I wasn't reaching out to them, it was I kind of isolated myself because I didn't know what to do. sometimes my daughter would just get so frustrated with me where she's like, Ma, you got to shake yourself out of this. Because either I was running to the church or I wouldn't go into church at all. Wanted Jesus, didn't want to hear not a thing about God, Jesus, kumbaya. I ain't want to hear none of that. But when I did reach out, those were the people that were there. It was based, and then I've had two siblings that died since my mother was killed. And one of my siblings, my sister Esther, we talked every day, 2 and 3 times a day. Something we hadn't done since we were young. So she was the person I know that would understand everything I was going through, and I could just be me and not have to worry about being judged. And then after, so she helped me a lot because I was able to talk to her. Now, see, she was one of the ones that was going to never forgive Dylan Ruth and made that very clear. And one of the things that she would always say, but they don't want to hear what I got to say. I got to say too. But you know, the media knows how to bring out the people who they need. So they kind of latched on to my sister Nadine and myself. And she felt very left out, very much. But we were each other's soundboard because what she couldn't say to media or whatever, she would say it to me.
Mhm. I asked that question because there's nobody out there that's like a grief expert with mass killings that are racially motivated. Who specializes in that to like help? Was there a therapist out there? It's just the intensity, as you said, with all the different layers of of meaning and circumstance, and it is as soon as you get through reconcile one, there's another, you know, um, that's right behind it, right? Hmm. Where do you worship now?
Actually, I'm with the United Church of Christ congregation.
Okay.
I am. I have a very ecumenical background, and I think that's why I'm able to just talk to anybody because of my different affiliations with the AME Church, and of course, the Presbyterian Church had a big, big influence on my life. And then I get connected with this UCC church, and I like them. So it's just like, hey, Jesus is Jesus, no matter what title you put on the group of people you're involved with, you know? Yeah, yeah.
And the writing of your book, can you share some about that process and how that was um, either comforting or challenge, the ways in which it was comforting and challenging in writing that book, and tell us also where we can purchase it.
Writing that book was cathartic. I was able to talk about some things that I've never talked about, feelings that I've kept inside. There were days that between me and Sherry, who co-authored with me, who wrote, who edited everything, days when we would talk on the phone for hours, and I'd get off that phone with her and I would be depressed. I would cry, wondering that my mom is going to yell at me for telling her business because I was hearing her in my head, like, you telling all my damn business. I could hear her. And my children telling me, Ma, you putting out all family business in the street. Or to my son who said, Ma, don't write this book if you're not going to be real and tell the truth. You can't, because I was talking about a particular thing, and he's like, well, you gonna tell the truth or what you doing? So there was a whole gambit of emotions and things that got that book out. But I'm very proud of that book. People that have read it have said that, and especially those that know me, said, Sharon, I could hear your voice in reading the pages.
Mhm.
I can hear you saying those words. So it was a good thing for me to write that book. But you could buy that book on anywhere books are sold. uh, Amazon,
The title of the book is
Books a
for
Million.
title
Yeah,
of the book
you
is
know,
For
I'm
Such a
sitting
Time as
looking
This. Yeah. For Such a
for
Time as
such a time.
This.
I
And I think it's published by Chalice
give
Press.
me, yeah. Hold one, just
Okay. All right.
I knew I had it. Here it is. For such a time as this, hope and forgiveness after the Charleston massacre. And yes, you can go through Chalice Press, that's the publisher, but Amazon and Books a Million and Barnes and Nobles, they carry it. I'm very proud of this book. I'm thinking about writing another book, but I'm not sure yet. But I'm thinking of the grief part and how people of color, we grieve different. And all of the books that talk about grief in the stages and all of this, there's a difference culturally in the grieving process. So I don't know, but we'll see what happens.
All right.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, Reverend Risher, I'm sorry. I hope that our paths will cross again, and we'll if you're ever back in South Carolina and want to we get some shrimp and grits or some of that low country boil.
man. Oh man, I know to throw down on shrimp and grits. That's comfort food for me.
That's
Shrimp
right.
and grits and okra soup.
Okra
And
soup.
all of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, okra with shrimp and all okra and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, the food is definitely part of the soul
Right.
and being from the low country. Hmm.
Well, I'm grateful for your time tonight. I think I speak on behalf of all of our participants in gratitude for you sharing um, all of your story with us, the parts that are still tender, um, and those that God is putting back together. And we thank you
Yeah,
for inspiring us to continue to take on this hard work of uh, inviting in the reign of God into this world through our actions and our relationship and where we choose, as you said, to put our bodies, who we choose to be
hmm,
beside. Will you
yeah.
will you grace us with prayer?
Okay.
You
Well,
don't
one thing I
apologize.
know that God is always around. That no matter where we find ourselves, if we hold on to the fact that we have a provider, that we have someone that loves us more than we can ever think about ourselves. We have a God that connects us not only through our humanness, but through our hearts. God, we ask you right now to bind our hearts together, to do the goodwill of the gospel, to love our neighbors as we would love ourselves, to open our minds to be able to see something different than what we see every day. God, I thank you for all that was on this call tonight. I thank you, God, for Dr. Amos and allowing me to speak to you tonight. May the peace of Christ be with all of you. And I ask this prayer
In the name of Jesus, amen and amen.
Amen. Bless you, sister. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being so patient. Thank you for allowing me to be on this Zoom with y'all tonight. I pray that as Thanksgiving comes up, and even though we are not able to gather as we would, that we have something that we could be thankful for, and that we can show gratitude for all that God has allowed us to have.